cold sort of that sheet about what controls what. You have some separations between herbicides that if you don't know that pretty well, you're going to be standing there going, okay, I know this is either metribuzin or atrazine or what, same symptoms, same general kind of spectrum of control, and you're looking for something to separate it out. So that's, I mean, in addition to looking for symptomology and general spectrum of control, you've kind of got to know some of those key things that, and Bruce can probably tell you what some of the key separators are there when you're trying to.
Yeah, we have a big list of
Yeah.
laid out too.
The screen is, I would tell you that I've seen a lot of screens, and boy, they are just all over the board in terms of how active herbicides are, right? It depends on whether they irrigated and how much rain, and then for the post, it depends on the timing and how big their weeds were and what their temperatures were and things like that. So, you know, the more of these that you look at in our archive, the better off you are. So just because it looks like this does not mean it's going to look like this when you go to the actual contest. It's just a lot of variability, and the groups that do the contest each year do their best, and they've just got some parameters they have to work with. So, and they'll have these staked, but you know, you need to, as you walk in, you're going to want to take a look at their markings of their crops and weeds, and one of the things you're looking for there right off is to get an idea of what came up and what didn't, because like our screen, they're going to have some stuff that didn't come up, whatever. So if you're assuming that the morning glory is there and you're using that as a delineator and they just didn't get any germination, that's kind of a mistake. So one of the things you're looking for there is, okay, there is no crabgrass or there is no lamb's quarter or whatever, so just, you know, that's out. That's not something you can use to separate it. So that's one of the things you're sort of looking for there to figure out as you go through. After that, you know, my strategy, I'm looking for a couple different things. The first thing I'm trying to figure out is it pre-emergence or post-emergence, right? Because you got the two lists, so that's sort of number one for me. If you don't see any skeletons and it's obvious that you've got stuff that's up in a lot of bare ground where you should have had stuff, that's obviously pre-emergence. You can still see some symptomology from pre-emergence on the species that you know, they don't annihilate, you know, that maybe come up on the edges. And but if I don't say it any other time, make sure you look. You'll have the plot that's sprayed, and a lot of times you can get some really good information out of that fringe on the outside that got like a half rate from a nozzle, because you know, you may have a screen where everything just works extremely well and you're thinking, I can't see a darn symptom anywhere in here, and you may see some symptomology on the edge. So make sure you do that when you're trying to look for symptomology. So that's sort of number one. After that, I'm looking for, can I tell whether this is a corn or a soybean herbicide or both, right? The majority of these are corn and soybean herbicides. There's some other ones in here, and then if you know kind of some of these herbicides are also labeled on wheat. So if you kind of know those three, you can kind of pick it out, and also on sorghum, and say, okay, you know, the corn's gone, right? So obviously it's not a corn herbicide, and that makes your life a lot easier. You've got some that are going to kill both the corn and soybeans. So that's kind of what I'm looking for, and then I'm looking for symptomology after that. I mean, I'm looking for general spectrum of control, and I'll point out some of these things as we go through. So once you get past crops, there's some key things you're looking for, like, you know, permit and accent both can be sprayed. Nicosulfuron and halosulfuron can both be sprayed post-emergence on corn, right? So you may see a relatively similar spectrum. The halosulfuron will annihilate the nut sedge and the accent, the nicosulfuron won't, right? So you're looking for some things like that, and I'll point some of those out as we go through. That's kind of my philosophy. So let's kind of walk through a little bit, and there's a few plots here that are a little bit. I got a couple sprays, so we'll try to do the best that we can. So you have three on the pre-emergence. You've got three photosynthesis inhibitors, right? Photosystem 2 inhibitors. You have metribuzin, atrazine, and diuron, right? And atrazine's used in what crop? Corn, right? And metribuzin used to be called Sencor, is primarily a soybean herbicide. Diuron's a non-selective sort of kill a lot of different stuff, but they have messed around with that in both corn and soybeans, and so it doesn't necessarily annihilate everything, even though it's an industrial. It's basically used for industrial weed control and some things like that, so it's pretty broad spectrum, but the plot here, it did not kill everything. Atrazine, and number 2 here is atrazine. And atrazine can, oh man, I mean, sometimes atrazine, it's great on broadleaves. You can see the corn stand's kind of variable. You can see the corn's fine there. Shouldn't really hurt sorghum, which is your row right here. Beyond that, it's basically a broadleaf herbicide, and there's some really nice symptoms on the beans here. It may or may not kill all the beans, and depending on the moisture, it can actually annihilate all the grasses, and then sometimes it really doesn't. I mean, it'll start to get weak on grasses. It'll start to get weak on morning glory, large-seeded broadleaves. Is common ragweed in one of the weeds, Bruce? Or I mean, in the screen for they should have common ragweed or not?
Giant ragweed.
Oh, in the contest they should have giant.
Yeah, they put in giant this year.
Oh, good. Okay, giant and morning glory are a couple that'll start to come through, but you have some really nice symptoms here, right? And this is your triazine symptoms showing up on soybeans. And again, it's something you may kind of see on the edge, and you can see it here. It'll develop in the leaves that as it starts to suck up some moisture and pull up some atrazine, you'll start to see it on the margins in the outer part of the leaf there. See it? You know, in the middle of the plot, it may be so active you don't see any soybeans, but they have relatively good tolerance sometimes. So that's what you're looking for. On
Guys, don't be afraid to like walk into the plots, look at the individual crops and species you're talking. This is
Yeah.
strictly for us. You can
Right.
bounce anywhere, walk over it,
Right.
pull stuff out. Like the reason this is here is for you guys to learn from this. So don't just stand on the edge. When
Right.
you point at something, get up and really look at it.
So there's your nice. You can see that sometimes with metribuzin. Metribuzin can damage beans, but you may not see that, right? And the difference between this and metribuzin is metribuzin is actually relatively safe on corn. Metribuzin will probably have less grass activity than the atrazine will. Yeah, the only thing I would say is don't walk in the plots that we're going to go into next, right? That's the only caveat for what Bruce just said.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Within reason.
Yeah. And then metribuzin is just way weaker on a few key species. I mean, I can't remember which one controls which, you know, like canola and stuff like that. But metribuzin's not going to control morning glory. It's not going to control giant ragweed, right? They're both going to be pretty good on lamb's quarter pigweed and things like that. So you can see them be somewhat similar on a lot of stuff. But I mean, and I think it's in here, right? Metribuzin's number 24.
Yeah.
You know, well, metribuzin, I got something else on top of it too. Yeah, but the soybeans actually should look pretty good. So I mean, and metribuzin may be a plot that you don't see any triazine symptoms at all. It's possible, or you may see them on the edge, but hopefully with the atrazine you'll see some on the beans. I think this is 3 is a check. I think I didn't find 3 on here anywhere. So okay. Okay, 4 is pyroxasulfone. So you have 2 shoot inhibitors. It's called long chain fatty acid inhibitor, dual, which is S-metolachlor, and then pyroxasulfone. They control grasses and generally are both safe on corn and soybeans, so you really shouldn't see any symptomology. The metolachlor, I looked at plot 20 and I didn't see any symptoms. It didn't look like it had even been sprayed, so I don't think metolachlor's out here actually, from what I could tell. But the pyroxasulfone here, one of the delineators between those two will be the pyroxasulfone's probably harder on the sorghum, and these are really nice. And I have no idea whether you'll see these. I mean, you can see the sorghum survive and not do too well. Just kind of stunted. You might see it not come up. But these, if you see this fusing up here and this buggy whip, that's shoot inhibitor symptomology right there. So that's your giveaway, right? That it's pyroxasulfone. Metolachlor can be hard on sorghum depending on whether the seed is treated. There's a seed treatment that makes it safe. So, you know, I think, but that's one of the delineators I would certainly be looking for. Pyroxasulfone, they're both good on grasses, sort of across the board. Pyroxasulfone is actually labeled for wheat in certain ways, whereas metolachlor is not, and it looks like the wheat is sort of stunted a little bit here, but you may see the metolachlor take out all the wheat and the pyroxasulfone leave some. Beyond that, pyroxasulfone is a little bit strong. I don't know all the differences in terms of the alfalfa and all that type of stuff. Pyroxasulfone is a little bit stronger broadleaf herbicide, so it should control the lamb's quarter pretty well, the pigweed, any nightshade, and have some possible activity on velvet leaf and common ragweed, whereas the metolachlor, much less activity on lamb's quarter. Should still do pretty well on pigweed, but will have almost none on velvet leaf and common ragweed. Okay, so that's kind of what you're looking for. But if you see these symptoms, that's your giveaway, and then you're just trying to figure out which one it is. And there may be, I can't recall if like the canola and some of this stuff, there's a difference between the two. I would have to go back to what you have in the archive there. So questions about that? And again, what you don't see there is skeletons, right? Okay. So you're not post. 5 is flumioxazin, and you have 2 PPO inhibitors, site 14, flumioxazin and sulfentrazone. They're soybean herbicides, but corn has relatively decent tolerance to both of them, and flumioxazin actually has a label. If you apply it so many days ahead of planting, you can use it. Sulfentrazone doesn't. So that next one down past all the stuff that hasn't been sprayed is the sulfentrazone, right? And this is the flumioxazin. You should see, in a lot of cases, no symptoms on soybeans. The corn is stunted, and let's see, the corn's back there. The sorghum is stunted more by the sulfentrazone than the flumioxazin. And I don't know if you'll see that. That may be something that you can look for. In this case, the sulfentrazone is a little bit better on the random grasses, but they both have some grass activity, and that's a little bit tough to tell also. So ragweed is a delineator here, okay? So the other thing is, see the canola difference, right? So if you're trying to tell the difference between the two, there's your canola difference. It should be safe on beans. Flumioxazin actually has a label on established alfalfa, so you may see a little bit more tolerance in the alfalfa with flumioxazin, sulfentrazone. Ragweed, right? Sulfentrazone's like water on ragweed. So if you got common and giant, well, it's giant, not common, right? Oh crap, I take that back. They're both weak. Sulfentrazone's got no activity on giant ragweed. The flumioxazin has a little bit, but I'm looking at these two plots thinking these two could be, I think, tough to tell apart, right? So I think you're keying in on a couple things here. Once you figured out it's a soybean herbicide, they're primarily broadleaf herbicides. They shouldn't have activity on nutsedge much. They're both pretty decent on morning glory, which differentiates them from metribuzin, because metribuzin's not good on morning glory, right? So you're going to have to you're going to have to figure out a couple key differences in some of these crops between these two, probably, to tell them apart. But where you have corn, the flumioxazin, I think, is likely to be safer on the corn than the sulfentrazone too. That's all I can really think of to say about those two, I think. Your symptoms, you can see some symptomology. I'm not really seeing any here. You can see flumioxazin, I think, is a little tougher on beans than sulfentrazone is under high moisture conditions. And if you see the difference here, you may be able to tell the difference. Sulfentrazone's beans are a little bit bigger, looking a little bit better. I don't see any symptomology here at all. So, okay. Questions? Sulfentrazone has a little bit broader label. I think it's got a sunflower label, right? And flumioxazin doesn't have a sunflower label, so looks to me like the flumioxazin sort of nailed the sunflowers, and that one's sure that they're just doing healthy. So you may be keying in on these between the sunflower and the canola. Okay. 10. If anybody misses this one in the contest, Bruce brings them back and you bend over and I kick you in the ass. All right, clethodim. Sorry, that's not very professorial of me, is it? All right, grass herbicide post-emergence. That's the only one in the contest. They could have put a couple different ones on to make it confusing, but if you see the grass dead, all the broadleaves completely unaffected, and then if you can pull them out, or they have one in a bucket or something like that where they pull out a corn or a sorghum leaf and it's dead at the base, right? It's a fatty acid inhibitor, so it's the only one in the contest. And my experience is they'll get, I think we threw it in on ours as a gimme, right? So, right, any questions about that one? That's an easy one. Uh, 11 is isoxaflutol, which is balanced. It's an HPPD inhibitor. So Whereas atrazine affects photosynthesis, and so you see like on the margins of those leaves and the older leaves in the soybeans, you see that yellowing and some of that type of thing. The HPPD inhibitors affect pigment development, right? And they actually affect one of the pigments that protects chlorophyll from degradation by sunlight. So when they inhibit that, you get this white because the chlorophyll starts to degrade, which of course turns plants white. And so if you can, like these leaves here, isoxaflutol is a corn herbicide. It's not really labeled for anything else. It's a relatively broad spectrum. You should see some giant ragweed and morning glory come through it, although well, this was sprayed with something else, wasn't it? This was sprayed with classics, a little hard to tell. But these symptoms here, the white, you're looking for white. And you may have a bunch, since it's applied pre, you may just have a bunch of bare ground, but this is something that on the edge of the soybeans, you might be able to see the white. And again, the Clemeron was sprayed on this, so it's kind of hard to tell what's going on, but the Clemeron didn't cause that white on the edge of the leaves. That was the isoxaflutol, the pigment inhibitor. So if you see white symptoms and it's not obviously not a post type situation, that's isoxaflutol. So. "12 is, okay. You have 4 ALS inhibitors in here, right? And I can talk you through a little bit on this, and I think you have them on your chart. So you have Clemeron ethyl, which we just kind of looked at, but that plot's a little bit tough because the one's got the isoxaflutol first. That's a soybean herbicide, right? The only thing it's used on. Halosulfuron's a corn herbicide, ALS inhibitor. Imazethapyr is a soybean herbicide. It's also safe on alfalfa. And nicosulfuron or accent's a corn herbicide that controls primarily grasses, right? So you got to know, you can, depending on activity and stuff, you can find some ALS inhibitor symptoms usually, and then you got to know your spectrum really pretty well and kind of what you're looking for. So ALS inhibitors are a little bit like glyphosate. They're systemic, right? So you're going to have stuff down in the new growth, and it's going to be sort of a general sort of off color depending on how long it's been on, and off color on the fringe here where the plants are still alive. Stunning off color, right? Kind of a general sort of sick looking, but you know, you can tell it's not as good as something like Roundup. And on soybeans, this is the halosulfuron, and I'll just tell you, I think it is, yeah, right up front, the halosulfuron. Your confusion there is typically between that and the nicosulfuron, because they're both going to annihilate the soybeans, and see the soybeans there. And one of the symptoms of ALS inhibitors on soybeans, especially if they don't outright kill them, the corn herbicides, is that those brown veins on the underside. Right, that's a key symptom of ALS inhibitors. There really isn't anything else that causes it. Imazethapyr won't cause it on beans. Clemeron may, but on the fringes and the plants that survive the halosulfuron and the nicosulfuron, you're looking for that. And that's pretty much a dead giveaway that you've got an ALS inhibitor. So in this case, you know, you're thinking, okay, ALS inhibitor, corn's not up, safe on corn. Halosulfuron's also labeled for sorghum, whereas nicosulfuron kills sorghum, right? So those are a couple key things there. And then beyond that, they're kind of similar on broadleaf, but a couple key things. One is halosulfuron is known for its nutsedge control, and it's the only ALS inhibitor here that'll really pretty much out flatten the nutsedge. The classic, the criminal, has some activity, and nicosulfuron and imazethapyr no activity on nutsedge.
Which one you said controlled nutsedge?
Halosulfuron, and then the Clemeron's got can but not. Clemeron will sort of turn it sickly yellow and it'll slowly be dying, whereas the halosulfuron, it'll pretty much kill it. It'll go right out. So that's one of your delineators. Halosulfuron is no good on lamb's quarter, if I remember right. You can see them in here, right? Whereas none of these are actually that good on lamb's quarter, so that's not a good delineator. But you're trying to figure out if it's a corn or a soybean herbicide once you figure out it's an ALS inhibitor. And then, you know, you're looking at, if you figure out, okay, I know it's a corn herbicide, if you can get that far, you're looking at the sorghum. The nicosulfuron, the other thing is the nicosulfuron is primarily a grass herbicide, so, you know, all these little grasses in here, the nicosulfuron will typically kill, it'll annihilate the wheat, whereas halosulfuron is primarily a broadleaf herbicide, so you shouldn't see much activity on grasses. So But those four, they can be tough. I'll try to, hit them as we go along. Here's the next one, that's just Pursuit. Now this one had diuron down, and so you can see that the diuron took out a lot of stuff, right? Because you can see what's left. So again, coming back to the trizene and the metribuzin, okay, you've got diuron, and atrazine, and the metribuzin, all photosynthesis inhibitors, and you can see the diuron actually did leave some sorghum. Would have left the corn probably to some extent, and left the beans are kind of injured. And beyond that, you're going to have to sort of know the spectrum of control. Diuron's kind of broad spectrum, but it did actually have a label for alfalfa at one time. But what you can see here is the imizethapyr symptoms, right? Imizethapyr, so if you're looking at this thinking, okay, I've got ALS symptomology, right? Okay, if you figured out it's not glyphosate, because glyphosate would have annihilated everything. You've got the yellowing down there and the stunning, and you're kind of looking at it thinking, okay, I got safe soybeans, so that's either Climburon or imizethapyr, and Climburon can't do this to sorghum. Climburon, it doesn't really have hardly any grass activity, so if you're looking at the two thinking I've got an ALS inhibitor safe on soybeans and I have no grass activity, that's going to be the Climburon, pretty much. Aside from that, I'm trying to think of the other differences there. Climburon's probably stronger on giant ragweed than the imizethapyr is. Both kind of even on morning glory. The imizethapyrs can have a little bit of activity on lamb's quarters, whereas Climburon's like water on lamb's quarter. It won't do anything to it at all. So, but once you have the ALS symptoms, you're trying to figure out corn or soybean herbicide, then you're trying to differentiate between two herbicides based on nut sedge, and kind of what the corn looks like and what the sorghum looks like. So, all right, and 14 is nicosulfuron. Right, so based on what we just talked about, and I should back up and say the imizethapyr there didn't hammer all the corn, which isn't atypical for it necessarily, but you got nicosulfuron here, again, same type of thing. You're looking at it thinking, okay, I got ALS, right? Got some yellowing, I got some stunning, and things like that. And sometimes morning glory is actually a great indicator for ALS. See that? A little bit of growth distortion, kind of yellowing, because it takes it a while to die, right? So if you got something you know is not glyphosate because it's being selective, morning glory is a good indicator for whether it's ALS or not. So again, nicosulfuron, between that and the halosulfuron, which is plot back there, right? Nicosulfuron annihilated the wheat pretty well and took out most of the rest of the grasses, whereas in the halosulfuron plot, the grasses are left, and if we had nut sedge, the nicosulfuron would leave the nut sedge. You also see, again, not quite as evident, but let's see the little bit of brown venation maybe. Yeah. So, questions about the ALS inhibitors? I think the overall symptomology, that indicates it's ALS is pretty easy to get, and then you got to know some key things. So, and then 15, you have 3 growth regulators, which can be a little tough. Looks to me like the clopyralid didn't get sprayed, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you have 2,4-D, clopyralid, dicamba. They're all growth regulators, so growth regulators cost what kind of symptomology? All right, twisting, yeah, all kinds of stuff, upside down, cup leaves, and all type of things like that. If you start with the easy one first, the clopyralids, 2,4-D and dicamba generally have activity on all broadleaves, and you can see it here, right? So we got 2,4-D, this didn't get sprayed, and then the dicamba. So if you're looking at the general spectrum of control down through there between the 2,4-D and dicamba, it's pretty similar, right? What I look for between those two is if I can get on the edge of the soybeans or the edge of the velvet leaf or something like that, and again, the canola here, for whatever reason, the 2,4-D is harder on the canola than the dicamba, so you got a few differences like that. I'm looking for sort of the dicamba to cause a little bit more of a cupping on some leaves than 2,4-D, but that's not, they sort of cause a whole bunch of different symptoms, so that's not necessarily a great indicator. Just trying to see if I found any here before.
Sometimes you get a lean on the corn, a little more severe with
2,4-D.
2,4-D.
Yeah. You can't really see it here. You may see that if the corn's got some size to it, and also the 2,4-D on the sorghum and things like that. The 2,4-D will cause that sort of corn or sorghum to do that a little bit, and sometimes you'll see a proliferation of branches at the bottom of the plant. Like this, I think is sort of you start to see this velvet leaf kind of doing a cup type of thing, right? And you got to be looking at everything else too. But if you see on the edge of the soybeans, one of them, the 2,4-D, sort of causes more of a strapping of the leaf and kind of a general things turning over. And the dicamba on the edge where you see symptomology can cause that sort of cupping. So if you see that, that's an indicator of dicamba. The clopyralid doesn't have the same spectrum of control. It misses lamb's quarters, it misses pigweed, right, and stuff like that. So if you're looking at a plot and you think, okay, I've got growth regulator here, I know I do, but I've still got a bunch of weeds left and it's obviously not that good on certain species, that's clopyralid, okay? That's kind of an easy one. It's the 2,4-D and the dicamba that are tough to tell apart. So I think I've guessed before. I was looking down through the two. There's not a lot of difference between them. Yeah. Okay. We're gonna get rained on here, huh? We're lucky. Huh?
There's some red coming towards us.
Quinclorac, which is, I don't know, it's a turf herbicide, right?
Yeah.
I think its claim is crabgrass control in turf, right? So you can tell by looking at the plot, it doesn't have activity on a lot of stuff. What's its mode of action? Oh, so it's growth regulator too. So if you see I think if you see a growth regulator, it's causing a bunch of symptomology on broadleafs, but not necessarily killing them, and taking the crabgrass out, I think that's your indicator that it's quinclorac. I can't really do much more than that because I never work with this herbicide, so I think the quinclorac's a turf herbicide that controls primarily crabgrass is what it's used for, I think. So if you have a plot, this and the clopyralid would be your two that you're trying to figure out, because you see growth regulator symptoms, right? Like this, see the cupping and that type of stuff. But actually, that's really nice cupping to illustrate dicamba. But
It looks like this one killed, I can't remember if this is the foxtail or the barnyard grass, but it's, in the other three it's out.
okay. So you growth regulator and you see grass dead, that's quinclorac. I think that's our conclusion there.
Barnyard grass, yeah, I think it should be barnyard
But-
grass. So it's got a good stand in the other three, but
Okay.
it's gone.
I mean, and foxtail and barnyard grass are not problems in turf a lot, so it's targeted more for crabgrass. So maybe it's not that hard based on that. Okay. Okay, 19 had pendimethalin pre and then bromoxynil post. Among all the pre-herbicides, pendimethalin is the one that has the broadest label for vegetable crops and a lot of different stuff. I don't remember if it's labeled for sunflower or not. It's a grass herbicide primarily, labeled for soybeans and labeled for corn. It can damage corn, and then it controls pigweed and lamb's quarter. That's it pretty much, right? Grass, pigweed, lamb's quarter. So you're looking for relative safety on sorghum, corn, soybeans, and then I seem to remember it having relative safety on alfalfa, so it's not killing all the alfalfa here. Shouldn't have much on morning glory, right? So I'm trying to think of what you confuse it with pre-emergence, and you could confuse it with dual metolachlor and pyroxasulfone because they're all grass herbicides. The pendimethalin's leaving the wheat. Pendimethalin, I think, will be a little bit more gentle on a couple of the sort of odder broadleaf species. I'm trying to think of what else there. The bromoxynil is a very broad spectrum broadleaf herbicide. Doesn't cause any symptomology to wheat or corn usually, or sorghum, but you can see it kind of annihilating the other things that are left here. And it's pretty broad spectrum contact type product. So you're seeing burning on the leaf, but not necessarily at the edges or anything like that, right? And I'm trying to think of what bromoxynil misses broadleaf-wise. It doesn't miss much broadleaf-wise. It's actually pretty good. So, but you should see, it's a corn herbicide, wheat herbicide. Actually, it's an alfalfa herbicide too. So if you're looking at the alfalfa and trying to delineate between this and a couple other broadleaf herbicides like fameciphin, and carfentrazone. This one should be more gentle on the alfalfa, I would think, the Remoxenil would. But other than that, it's across the board. If you see all the broadleafs gone, corn may be good with a little bit of splotching. Same thing on the sorghum, and the soybeans dead. That's Remoxenil. Not used very much actually anymore. Really surprised they have it in the contest. Okay. They're a little bit out of order here. You got 3 non-selective herbicides that are post. You got glufosinate, glyphosate, and paraquat, right? In theory, they kill everything. And when you see the contest plots, it can look, I mean, they can kill everything. They flat out can. It can be really hard to tell. This was supposed to be glufosinate. It didn't get sprayed. Glufosinate causes kind of whitish symptoms. Paraquats or can cause white, sort of burning and then white, especially maybe on the margins. You don't see it here. Paraquat's a contact product, so you're seeing outright burning, not on the oldest leaves, sort of complete coverage, not down in the whorl, no change of color down in the whorl. And then glyphosate is systemic, right? So like the ALS inhibitors, you're looking for symptoms down in the whorl, like this, all right, especially on the edge, that white, yellow down in the whorl of the corn, that's glyphosate, systemic.
These are all good ones when you go to that edge instead of having complete annihilation.
Yeah.
As you go up, you'll get actual symptomology where you'll see like speckling versus something in the whorl.
Yeah.
So it makes a big difference with these when you go to the edge.
So also paraquat fries things off, probably fried the morning glory off pretty well. Glyphosate's a little bit weak on morning glory. It takes it a long time to kill it. See the kind of yellow and the white in the new growth, and it's sort of slowing down. Yeah, so that you may look at the plot middle and between the 3 and go, what the heck? I can't tell anything. So you're definitely looking at the edges. And you're looking for, like, if it's non-selective and it's killed everything, you're looking for symptoms down in the whorl, the new growth, yellowing and things like that, that's not burning, and that's glyphosate. If it's got white to it, if you can find any white, it'd be the glufosinate. Glufosinate among the 3, I would say, is probably the weakest across the board on a few broadleafs. So if you see a few broadleafs sort of still there, big pigweed and things like that got some symptoms, some white symptoms, but aren't dying, that would be the glufosinate. And the paraquat is, yeah, and the grass is a good place to look for white symptoms. Because the paraquat is, which one's paraquat? 24, right? So see the paraquat, I'm going to skip this one for a second. The paraquat's down in here. And so you see the beans, edges of the beans, not yellowing, not white, not down in the whorl, just contact burn. And same thing with the corn. There's a little bit of white and things like that here, but you see any yellow down in the whorl? No, there's no yellow down in the whorl, so it's not systemic. And then in between us, we kind of went through carfentrazone and fomesafen. All right, 22 and 23. These are PPO inhibitors, so they're both contact herbicides. So you see some of the same symptomology as, right? Look at the corn, burning leaves, burnt leaves, paraquat, right? They all cause that type of symptomology. The fomesafen is labeled for soybeans. It can cause some damage on soybeans. That's 23. Carfentrazone, and you can see the fomesafen burning the corn, right? Carfentrazone is labeled for both corn and soybeans. It can also cause some burn on corn depending on temperature and dew and things like that. Beyond that, the fomesafen should have a little bit more activity on grasses, and the carfentrazone is not as broad spectrum. So the carfentrazone will get weak on, I think, bigger pigweed, bigger lamb's quarter. Fomesafen should sort of hang in there on all that. I'm trying to think of the other differences that are easy on these two. I mean, you look down through there and they're both kind of equally good on a lot of stuff down in there. So I think corn and sorghum might be your delineator there. Carfentrazone is actually labeled for sorghum too, although it kind of nailed it here. And you can see the fomesafen really tough on the grasses there. Yeah, trying to think, you can see, what's that grass right by, it's going across right the middle there. You can see the difference there. See, the fomesaphon's got some activity on grasses and the carfentrazone really doesn't. So, okay. All right. So mesotrione and tembotrione. All right, based on what I told you earlier, what's the mode of action, site of action? Remember what I talked about, plants turning white. Pigment inhibitor, right? Yeah, so, but post-emergence pigment inhibitors, you see the white, right? Pigment inhibitor, mesotrione or tembotrione, right? And so that, I think that part's really easy. You should see some symptomology, I mean, left even regardless of how they've sprayed. I think in our plot last year, we were past the peak symptomology and you could still see it in the plot. So I think you'll see the white, you can tell it's foliar applied. And then beyond that, the tembotrione is a good grass herbicide typically, and mesotrione's not. And that may be the only way you can tell them apart. It looks like here the mesotrione's a little bit stronger, or at least a little faster on the Morning Glory. Back in there. But you're looking for differences in grass control, and mesotrione actually has decent activity on crabgrass, but whereas you see the tembotrione pretty much taking the grass out over here, you can see them surviving, plants surviving over here, and they've got that white color. And you may not even see that. So I think those two are not that tough. I think you walk in, see the white, think, okay, it's one of those two, and then you look and see what the grass control is like. That's kind of what I do, and I don't think they're that tough to tell apart based on that. So anyway, that's my philosophy on this green.